Mm. Good evening. I had a very full day today, and I'm getting pretty tired this evening. So, with luck, for the first time, let's see if I can be reasonably quick with this. I ended up sitting in front of the computer for a while, going, "Okay, I have chosen to show up every day if I can to do these live streams." Felt a decent amount of conflict about what is alive for me here. I think the thing that's actually most alive, the part that's most vivid, is about a sort of conflict that, let me clean that up and start over a little bit here. So I want to talk about what it means to predict the future. And I mean this pretty widely. There are a lot of tools that science uses for this, right? The kinds of tools that we used for very carefully modeling the trajectory of the mission to the moon. So that if I understand right, NASA got that right within a few seconds. Because this is an example of a future prediction tool. Another is these various divination tools that a lot of people like to use with tarot and astrology, things like this. People have very strong opinions about which ones are acceptable to use or to even try to use, how they have different purposes. But oops, let me quiet this. But at a basic level, it sort of looks like what these are for is predicting what is going to happen, with some caveats. Now, I want to talk about some of these caveats here because I have a lot of mental clarity about one particular domain of this, and I want to talk about this a little bit here to give some context. But there's also something about it when I feel into it. I feel a little confused. So I want to explore that here. So part of the context for this, the reason I wanted to talk about this today is I noticed in looking through some astrological stuff that apparently there is going to be a cluster of 6 of the 7 classical planets, all in the same zodiac sign, starting on November 9th and continuing through the 10th and 11th. Since the moon stays in any given astrological sign for in the ballpark of 2.5 days. There's a way in which there's something I have these old instincts, not that old, but like these instincts from the rationality community, the community of people that I spent most of my time with down in California from about 2012 to 2018, end of 2018. There is this general ethos of, if you can make a prediction, then make a prediction, and then you put it out there, and then you can then test whether your predictions are right. And there's a simplification to that, and I'll want to get into that. A sort of oversimplification, I think. But there is something very intellectually clean about saying, oh, if you think you can tell the future, write down your predictions, and then check. If you find you can't tell whether you got your prediction right or wrong, that means you need to be more specific. If you're always getting all of your predictions right, but your theory isn't really tight, it's worth being suspicious. Are you massaging the data? Is there some way that you can cut straight to the truth? There's a general tendency in my experience with the tools of the rationality community, where it's sort of like it's the conscious mind versus everything else. Like you're fighting for truth against a very corrupt or corruptible system. I think that's I now think that's basically backwards. That the reason why there's any impression of a fight is because there are levels at which the person in question has not fully decided to prefer truth. That's actually the center of focus. It's not about stronger mental techniques or more discipline or training yourself in mathematical reasoning more carefully. Those can help to highlight places where one has not chosen truth, but because of the way that rationalization actually works in the human mind, it doesn't matter that much. This is getting a little off in the weeds. To me, there's something exciting about the clarity of such a cluster, right? Having such a cluster of planets all in one sign, because for anybody who thinks that there is something to astrology being able to predict things, this is very clear. Like, I don't know exactly what it's clear about, but it's very simple. It's immensely simple. And so this, like, it's a level at which I don't really understand a whole lot about how astrology works. I have some basic understanding of the system so that I know how to read what people are saying, and I know how to look at a natal chart and say some things that sound profound. And I think they are. There's a special type of insight. This is an important distinction, and I hope I can get to that here, the difference between oracular power versus divination. And I think that they're importantly different. They're very importantly different. And divination doesn't actually require accuracy in order to be powerful and to work. So I can definitely use I can use astrological tools for divination, which is another way of saying meaning making. I know how to make meaning and help other people to make meaning. But there's a stronger claim in a lot of astrological groups, which is that you can use it to make predictions. And so for me, there's this kind of excitement, sort of the mixture of, I don't know, this wild cowboy rationalist thread of like, oh boy, you can make predictions and we can find out if the whole field's bullshit. And there's kind of this thrill and this sense of, hey, maybe there is secretly a tool buried in there, but we don't know how to use it. Let's take a look. There's something funny about that. There's something very funny about that. So to a community of people who are into astrology, among a bunch of other things, I put forward a thing saying, hey, look at this. Look at this. There's a what's called a stellium. This cluster of planets, this intense cluster of planets going on in this astrological sign. And it's over a very specific period of days. Arguably, the period starts on February 1st, because that's when the fifth planet, Venus, moves into Aquarius. This is all just in my mind because I looked this up and this is exciting. This is clear. We can start making predictions. There should be a buildup that starts up on February 1st. You should be able to predict the arc that happens as the moon swoops through the zodiac. And then there should be some sort of peaking effect that happens on February 9th, the evening of the 9th, going through the 10th and the 11th. Very clear. Right? There's a nice, like the one planet that is not in this cluster is in a position that should have a very clear, specific way of interacting with all of them. They should all be doing something in particular. I haven't sat down and reasoned about it carefully, trying to figure out, well, what would this system claim is going to happen? Can I even make predictions about what it claims is going to happen to me? But it's so simple. I think it is the most simple configuration I have yet seen anywhere for astrology stuff. And so I'm looking at this going, we can test our tools. And so this is where this distinction becomes important. So when I'm making this distinction between what I'm calling divination and oracular power, basically the big key for science was that it figured out a way to have oracular power, in part by giving up on the domains that had to do with making meaning. This is a little oversimplified, but it's not. But it's importantly right. It's importantly mostly right. When I'm talking about oracular power, the power of an oracle, the ability to actually foretell the future. I'm not making claims about historical oracles. I'm describing, like, I needed a term for this, the actual ability to predict the future. there's a quirky thing where over the arc of the history of science, anytime a form of divination turned out to have actual oracular power, it got called science. And and then we repeated this cycle of continuing to dismiss things that weren't science. It's like, okay, we can play this game. But there's something funny about how there's like a dishonesty game that's being played in all directions. I think that this is closer to the core of what I actually care about. There's a dishonesty game that's being played all over the place. And there's a spot where I feel a little confused, a little disoriented in my own way of facing all of it. But I have trouble even communicating what that difficulty is, because I'm operating at a level of cleanliness about caring about the truth that I don't find around me a whole lot. Like, I find it in many of the people who I think are inclined to listen to what I have to say. So if you're listening to this, you may actually be one of the exceptions. But at the same time, I still bump into these cultural things that are about repeating ideas or rejecting ideas because they have the wrong aesthetic, rather than continually anchoring towards the direction of what's true. So what I'm looking at here is, so as I talk about this stuff, so I'm referencing all these things about astrology and divination and oracular power, there's a part of me that feels some embarrassment because of an internalized attempt to navigate an allergy that shows up in scientific leaning social circles. And there's something about, there is something important to point at about what divination is doing that isn't about telling the future, but looks like it's about telling the future. That's actually really important. It has a twisted thing, a twisted problem, and the scientific circles focus entirely on that problem and purely on it. It's like it's trivializing all of the value that people are getting from the divination arts. And because the way that people know how to access it is, like, there aren't many pathways. There aren't many pathways left because of a sort of scraping of the Western traditions. But then there is the problem in the divination arts of people not noticing that they are divorcing themselves from truth by kind of pretending they can sort of tell the future, but not really looking, and then finding rationale for why they don't need to look. There's this twisted weakening of the whole structure. So yeah, I'm noticing myself rambling around a topic and having some difficulty focusing. So my mind is quite tired right now. Hey, Ronnie. See, Ronnie said two things, and then, and then the comment vanished. Oh well. Yeah. So what I'm actually am looking at here when I'm talking about divination, the term I'm using that term almost as an etymological thing. Like, divination, clearly to me, maybe I'm wrong about the etymology, but I'm staring at it going, it looks to me like it originally meant to make divine. This is sacred. And there's something very powerful about the sort of narrative control and the perceptive shift that's available, not only in being able to recognize a stack of cardstock as having something sacred to it and to bring meaning into one's life, but to be able to do that for another person as well. If somebody is feeling lost in their lives and you provide, like, there's a statistical trick that has to do with, if you throw random data at a learning system. This works for computers as well, for machine learning. If you throw chaos into a learning system, it can break it out of what's called overfitting. It can break it out of having focused its perception too narrowly. But if it's received as chaos as opposed to input from truth, it's hard in practice for human beings to take that in. So having a context where these tarot cards are really sacred, they're special, they key into the divine structure of the universe. So even if there is nothing to something like tarot, even if there's nothing at all, there's still value that comes from doing readings for oneself and doing readings for other people if you can kind of lean into it. Right? So to me, that is divination, like the ability to create meaning and meaningfulness for oneself and for other people. There's an issue having to do with the divorce from truth that comes from the illusion of what the cards or whatever are doing for you without looking. Right? And this gets to the core of the issue. But I see Ronnie actually posted the thing. 2 things. 1, screw disliking things for being aesthetically wrong. 2, tell me more about the value. This seems different from what you're talking about, but Vannevar argued it used to be useful for playing mixed strategies. I'm not quite sure what the thing about playing mixed strategies is about, but yeah. And Ronnie continues, do you think it's difficult to get the value without believing in the literal predicative power? I think it is difficult for most people currently, and I don't think that difficulty is inherent. I can use tarot cards, and I don't think they have inherent power. But I absolutely get the sort of magical value from it. I can feel the deep symbolic shifting. Part of the reason for that is my experience of it is very deeply entwined with like my preference is for truth. But that is not an aesthetic, it's a fact. Truth is a fact. And the way that I can get along better with reality by being in attunement with truth is a fact. I can see it. I see the theorem in some deep sense. So living from there and orienting to something like using tarot or using astrology, there's a way where I don't have to believe in its predicative power. And I have pretty strong suspicions that the tarot has absolutely no deep connection to the structure of everything any more than anything else does. Like it's cardstock with ink on it. Where does the meaning come from? It's got to be coming from me. So, and knowing that and interacting with it, I can still shift into a framework where I am experiencing the interaction of the cards as experiencing all of this as a dream. There's a shift I can make where I can actually experience the interaction with the cards as reflecting back something that still gives me significant insight, which sometimes is actually helpful for anticipating the future, because it shakes me out of the frames that I'm stuck in and helps me to see things afresh and has me go, oh, wait, right, of course, there's this nuance for these details of what today is likely to be like that I just didn't think of course. And then when I check back at the end of the day and I reflect on it, I go, yep, that totally helped. That totally helped. So I don't think it's an essential quality. I don't think believing in the predicative power when it isn't there is an essential quality. That said, there's an additional thing, which is nothing is divorced from reality. Right? This is a way of articulating the same thing I think that Ken Wilber was expressing when he said, no one is smart enough to be completely wrong. So there's this, there's something to be said about the fact that there's a whole causal chain that goes into if I shuffle some tarot cards and with this attitude of show me, the classical thing in this group that I posted this astrological bit to, is show me what today brings. And you shuffle the cards and you pull out a tarot card and you look at it and you try to feel into and anticipate what is this reflecting about what the day is likely to bring. And then, in a way that would just drive any kind of scientist or rationalist up the wall, sort of classic rationalist, classic neo-rationalist. I don't know how to say the people in the Bay who tend towards a very specific kind of framework from my experience. The second move you do with this, as part of learning how to use the tarot well as a divination tool, as something to make things divine, is at the end of the day, you look at the tarot card and you look across your day and you try to feel out how the card was accurate. Right? You're actively employing the mechanisms that are responsible for, what's it called, confirmation bias. You're actively trying to use that in order to feel into how you can live the meaning of the cards. Right? So there's it's possible to do that. My experience is it's possible to do that and come to have a very strong attunement to all of these symbols without getting into a place where I actually believe that the cards are inherently like the cards on their own. Like if someone else shuffled them, they put things out, or you gave it to a machine, that it would do the right predicative thing. But the thing is that by doing this process, there's a way in which there's a whole causal chain to, on a given day, when I pull out a card and I'm looking at it, how it is that I look at the card and I try to interpret it and I try to feel out the day, the interpretations I come up with before my day has started. There's a causal chain for all of that. And that causal chain is intertwined with reality. The question is whether what I consciously think is going to give me in terms of these interpretations, is going to give me a conscious understanding of what to predict for the day that turns out to be usefully accurate. Ronnie adds, aside, I don't know how many of your audience this is true for, but I sometimes feel like we mean slightly different things by true. Like I think of true as a property of a sentence or a belief. It seems like you think of it as something more, or something, I don't know, not quite that. It'd be cool if you bridge that gap for me sometime. Yeah, I did talk about this in some previous video. I honestly don't remember, but I'm essentially, like I know this distinction you're talking about. The word true actually refers to two different things that roughly correspond to the interpretations of the world that the left and right hemispheres of the brain do. The one that you're describing, this correspondence theory of truth, or this correspondence model of truth, is the left hemispheres. I mean, this is like the what is it, the basic principle of Tarski, or I forget exactly how this goes, of the statement "it is raining" is true if and only if it is raining. So this attempt to say truth is a property of maps and describes how they match the territory. And that's the left hemisphere's model of truth, and that's important. It's actually a very useful thing for the left hemisphere to be tracking. The distinction I'm highlighting is that the right hemisphere, well, first off, I think if you're going to pick one hemisphere to side with, you damn well better pick the right one. And I don't just mean the correct one, and I don't mean that as a pun. The right hemisphere understands context and purpose and meaning and relevance. So the right hemisphere's version of truth is it true? And it's a little hard to say because the right hemisphere doesn't have Broca's area. Broca's area is on the left. It doesn't have articulation of this. But there's like a way of articulating this is that in a rant that I keep finding myself wanting to give is that the map never matches the territory. This is not just a matter of cute wordplay of, oh, well, you can't fold the territory up and put it in your glove compartment. I mean that maps are, like, the only time the map matches the territory is when you are staring at the map. The map territory correspondence is not a correspondence between a map and truth in the right hemisphere sense. It is a mapping between a map and a model of reality. You find this all the time with things like the map, the model that consists of the model of classical physics, giving predictions about how far a ball is going to roll given the frictions or the speed it's going to move at, etc. You can come up with these calculations of putting a ball on an inclined plane and what is the speed it reaches when it hits the bottom. You can use the model of physics to calculate this. And then you can measure the ball. But what you are comparing the model to is not the experience of the ball moving. You're comparing it to your measurements of the ball moving. This is really important because it means that when you're saying, oh yes, this is correct because these correspond, here is the data. Well, data is exactly information extracted from reality and abstracted into something you can hold in order to compare it to a model. So when the left hemisphere is talking about truth, and this is predominantly the type of truth that the rationality community would use, and I think this is what you're talking about when you're saying what the word true refers to. Does the sentence match reality? No sentence matches reality. No sentence can ever match reality. What happens is, as we experience reality, we abstract aspects of it and then try to articulate and see, can we get our words to match our abstraction? But that's in a thought bubble. I can't say this direct experience. I can't say it. What I can do is highlight aspects of the experience, which is a left hemispheric function, zooming in and pulling details out of context, and then describe those details. Oh, it is a cup. It is blue. It has a cool temperature to it. And it has a smoothness to it. When I tap it with my knuckles, I'm able to hear a sound. But I'm already abstracting from the experience, and in the act of articulating, I'm actually distancing myself a little bit from the direct experience. So when I'm saying what is true, I would love to have a better word for this. The problem is that when the left hemisphere tries to understand what the right wants to point at, and then the left uses a word for it, the model the left can do is this correspondence theory. So when I'm talking about truth, I'm trying to gesture at the actual thing that is. What's actually here. Not what I think it is. Not what the data show is. What is. I hope that makes some sense. This is an embodied form of truth rather than a mental form of truth. And I see you say, ooh, that does drive me up the wall. Yes, in terms of practicing using confirmation bias. Yeah. So to get back to the main thing, it's highlighting here. Most divination tools require a use of confirmation bias. Or rather, I should say, require using the mechanisms of the mind that are also responsible for confirmation bias. Part of the reason for that is the whole reason why confirmation bias can happen in the first place. Confirmation bias is sort of an over-pattern matching. So the process of trying to make meaning out of a set of symbols or a way of interpreting the world requires us to read into it a little bit extra. And the ability to, I feel like this is not quite the direction I want to go in. So I can feel my mind trying to rev up and run through theory, but that's not my intent. What I want to do is I keep trying to aim at something, and I'm so used to using my mind. I'm trying to anchor in the body and move from an energetic place. It's tricky. So when I issued this, issued this challenge is not the right word, but when I put forward this thing of, hey, here's this collection of all these planets in this astrological sign. This is a super easy sky to analyze. We should be able to make some concrete predictions. There's for me a kind of excitement of being able to take a divination tool. Astrology is very much a divination tool. It's very much about making meaning, primarily with the tools that are related to confirmation bias. and it's beautiful at that, and does a wonderful job. And there's still these claims that it has actual future-telling powers, actual oracular power. So I look at this going, cool. Well, if that's true, let's explore it. There's a piece here that's a little dangerous for a lot of people, which is that if you have to believe in the future-telling abilities, like with the tarot, like if you have to believe in the cards, in the power of the cards, in order to receive the meaning making, then you can't afford to test the tool's oracular powers. There's this whole Western trauma that we're sitting with. Like this trauma, at the risk of activating Godwin's law here, that trauma is part of what resulted in the Nazi event. Like World War II and Nazism happened to a very large extent because of an attempt to make meaning within a nihilistic context. The reason the Nazis pulled on a bunch of Friedrich Nietzsche's materials is because Nietzsche was grappling with the nihilism of we have systematically murdered meaning. We have seen so much success from science in a way that systematically attacks all of our methods of making meaning by prioritizing the question, let's test its oracular power. To hell with divination, let's just see if it can actually predict things. That as an ethos and as a machine created a really massive problem in that the world that it created and that it invited us all into, a sort of completion of a kind of something I will tongue-in-cheek refer to as sort of a magic spell that Isaac Newton cast on the world. It completed sealing us into a universe that can never have meaning except as an accidental byproduct of meaningless activities, meaningless motion. And Nazism was a proposal for answering this deep crisis of meaning. And we decided that that answer was not acceptable. Communism was another wave of the same thing. We haven't vilified communism to nearly the degree that we have Nazism, but it's the same thing. That arc produced a whole lot of desperate spiritual clinging and trying to sort out, how do we discover meaning? How do we create meaning in a world where the most successful, powerful engine of command over the physical world claims that we are sealed at the bottom of a tomb that is eternal and expansive and that there is nothing else in all of existence? Well, that resulted in a lot of cults, and after the Jim Jones massacre, we ended up with a traumatic, allergic cultural response to cults. So today, anything that stirs meaning and belonging often gets labeled a cult. If it's like, once it starts to create any kind of social momentum, oh, that's a cult, people are making meaning. Well, yeah, I mean, technically, literally, yes, of course. Like a cult is an abbreviation of the word culture. And it is a little culture, a cult. And yes, it works because people are making meaning together. But there's something missing about what's the problem. What exactly is the problem? The word cult has ceased to be attached to that meaning arc. So we're encountering this sort of this massive Western trauma, a collective trauma, about how do we orient to making meaning and have oracular power. This is not a puzzle we have really solved. I experience a very clear-lived solution. Like, I don't mind having my meaning-making methods destroyed. Because my source of meaning is not the methods. My source is my ability to create methods, and that I can weave in and out of them. There's a kind of walking through worlds skill that, to me, seems obviously true. And I mean that in the right hemispheric way. What I'm trying to refer to there is, regardless of, even if you are quite confident that the Christian God does not exist, it is still like something to believe in such a God. And it is quite possible to enter an experience of the world in which that belief is true. So this is a little bit like playing What If or playing a fantasy game. What if the Christian God were real? But entering that world and experiencing it and feeling the way in which the earth holding you up is God's love supporting you, the way in which there is this ongoing participation in the unfolding of transcendent love that you are invited to participate in and to wash away your sins in the course of devotional work and prayer. Right? There's an actual meaning-making system that you can engage with, and if you can feel that, if you can feel the truth of that, you can know that it's false while also still engaging with it. There's something about that shift it's crystal clear to me now. That I notice it's like an essential prerequisite for being able to answer questions like, hey, so what do we think we're going to predict happens on February 9th through 11th? Is anything special going to happen? Can we predict it rather than just afterwards noticing that something interesting happened and going, that's because of this collection of planets? Can we do the prediction ahead of time and just be right? There's something very threatening by default about really sticking out one's neck if meaning-making methods feel fragile or rare, like they're received and like you have to believe in them or else you are tossed back into the nihilistic tomb. So where I feel some disorientation is something like, I'm confused about how to be kind. I'm really confused about how to be kind. Because I think a lot of people, like I'm remembering a couple of months ago, I think, I had a conversation with some people about astrology, and I noted that one of the areas that had me almost just completely run out of patience with it was because I couldn't figure out how it was a system. Eventually I answered this. I figured out how to make it a coherent system, how to read charts. It turns out that there's a very mathematical thing that is more traditional. But I had just figured that out. And up until that point, I was ready to give up on astrology, even as a divination method, recognizing this is something other people can do, but it's just too annoying and squishy, and I don't know how to do this. In particular, I found it irritating that a lot of people would believe in it as an oracular source, that it could tell the future, but that people weren't putting their necks on the line. And the reflection I got back was, oh yeah, people keep having this misunderstanding. Astrology isn't really about telling the future. Which would be fine. This is like saying astrology is just a divination tool and does not have oracular power, or if it does, we don't know about it. That's fine. But this came moments after describing in detail when would be good times to make effective launches for products or for services, and when would be bad times. So, again, and other things that I would hear in astrological circles sound like I listened to a podcast trying to understand something called the exaltations, like where the exaltations come from. And there was some cute rationalization that I found entertaining that had to do with, it was basically a memory tool, but they were trying to come up, but there's a general tendency I observe in divination-focused communities to not be able to distinguish between memory tools and clear reasoning. Like these two get merged together, that helps to inform what kind of reasoning counts as good. So Anyway, that's getting a little in the weeds. And there's a place in me that feels annoyed and almost offended. The offense is coming from a sense of pride in the potential for the human race. We can think more clearly than this. We can be brilliant. And there's a part of me that wants to burn to the ground every place that I keep seeing people doing anything less than that. But again, I'm a little confused about how to be kind here, instead of just ferocious, or just condemnatory, or just quiet. But in this particular podcast, they were talking about how, well, you know, when using astrology to make predictions, I mean, you got to be really careful, because like astrology is describing the overall energies, and so there's a bunch of different possibilities, and you can't really be exact about what precisely is going to happen. And on the one hand, this seems important to track. Like, even in my best steel man, my best attempt to strengthen the argument of astrology to say where its oracular power might be, I would still look at it and go, it's not going to tell you what words someone is going to say. But it does seem like it should tell you something like the overall feeling that there's going to be more resource to make happen in a particular way. I can see that. It's like it's describing it's describing waves in the ocean. It's not telling you when a surfer is going to surf well or poorly. Like, okay, I can run with that. But you should still be able to have some way of interacting with predictions that you can measure. This is the essence of science. This is the essence. Sorry, this is not just the essence of science. This is the core relationship to truth that made science possible. The recognition that it is possible to put some kind of anticipation on the line, that it's possible to really explore and go, you know, I don't know exactly what this phenomenon is going to be, but let me try to make a model that will give me some idea and then check to see whether it's right. If you can't check whether it's right, you can't get feedback. So even if your tool has oracular power, you cannot get oracular. You cannot learn the oracular power, because your feedback isn't feedback. It's just pure noise. So there's this kind of, there's this itch in me of wanting to burn to the ground all of this effort to hide. Here we have a clear opportunity. Let's actually put the whole art on the line. This is not me trying to hunt it down and destroy it. This is looking at it saying, you know, maybe somewhere, maybe. But there's some philosophical reasons, some deep things having to do with the structure of consciousness that make me think that the scientific dismissal of astrology is not actually looking at the core of astrology, and astrologers aren't really dialoguing with that either. There's actually some reason to think why there may be some kind of reflective correspondence between positions of the stars and how people orient. But it's not because there's some sort of physics influence. It's something else. It has to do with the mythic origins of why we were inclined to name the planets the way we were in the first place. And really, it's the mythic level that would be influencing us, not the stars. Right? The stars are the positions of the stars in the way that we. I don't want to go into it more than that. But there's a way of looking at this that highlights we're not talking about an interaction between a gas giant and Earth, like looking at Jupiter and Earth interacting in some fashion or whatever. We're talking about the influence of the subconscious mind in individuals and collectively. That's a very real force. And we can learn how to examine that and to see how the stories that we tell about it are reflected in our physical environment and the parts that we choose to pay attention to. Right? So to me, it seems very plausible that there might be some way to look at astrology from a particular angle that might result in a type of oracular power that science is actually horrendous at. Science is utter gibberish shit in its current stage at recognizing the flow of archetypes and archetypal resonance and the flow of the subconscious, even though these are measurable forces. It could be a domain of science. In fact, there was a brief period of time where it almost was the field of memetics. Unfortunately, the field of memetics died by the left brain analytic knife because they couldn't find the equivalent of DNA in a meme, and they started to run into trouble with defining precisely what a meme is, because they were trying to me. This is just an example of the epitome of the left-brained blindness of modern scientific culture. They were focused on how memes are supposed to be analogous to genes, but they couldn't quite define what the thing is that is perpetuated from one instance to another when spreading an idea. Is it the words? Is it the thought? Is it the behavior? Like, what is this? Even though the original intuition that caused memetics to appear in the first place was that we're examining not the analog of genes, but the analog of organisms. We were able to have biology before we understood genetics, and this is the same thing. We're looking at a biology of behavior. So it is a scientificizable field, but science, because of the means that define it, hasn't looked. And because of that, I'm inclined to think that some of the more mythic things that esoteric philosophy has played with are more likely to tap into predicative forces that are in that domain than can science yet. But I'm still struck with this sense of how to move towards clarity with kindness. It seems like there's a piece that's not just about, am I embodying it? Sometimes I worry about whether other people perceive me as embodying it, and there's some work to do there. There's this bit of, as Ronnie mentioned earlier in this video of, I forget exactly how he phrased it, something like screw the, screw disliking things for being aesthetically wrong. Just tell me about the value. Yeah. I think grounding myself in that kind of attitude of like, it's not my business if other people judge me for it. It just isn't. If I worry about it, then we can play a co-manipulative game. If I ignore it, then I can just speak clearly. And then those who are interested in listening and are capable of hearing can hear what I have to say. So weeding out the parts of me that are concerned about, is this going to sound crazy? Maybe, that's not my business. But there's still this extra piece. You know, maybe this is more of the same thing as I reflect on it. Maybe I'm just worrying about other people's ability to hear and hold it in their hearts. I'm concerned about breaking the fragile meaning-making methods of people who are holding on to things like astrology and tarot and tools like that. And for that matter, people who are clinging to science as a method of saying, at least I know something and I can know it and focus on the knowing instead of on the abyss that is surrounding me at every constant moment. There is a danger in the transition. It's not a deep danger, but it's kind of it's a challenge of dropping the ability to know anything. I'm still deepening that. But it basically crossed the main threshold. I can tell that pretty clearly. I'm not concerned about having a correct model. I prefer my models to be useful and well reflective of my interactions with reality. But I have, as time goes on, I come to have a deeper understanding that I actually know quite literally nothing. I just deepen that understanding more over time. And that gives me tremendous freedom. It means that I don't have to be bothered by confusion. It means that I don't have to worry about believing the wrong thing, because it's all wrong. It's immensely freeing, and it makes it a lot easier for me to keep orienting towards truth. I recognize that what I just said sounds immensely paradoxical, probably. But it's a natural result of attuning toward truth. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm just infantilizing people too much. I hadn't realized that I would actually just land on yes, okay. But I can actually feel that. I can feel it ringing in my core. I think it's just a matter of me not taking responsibility for other people's transition, but instead just pointing out here's the bridge. So, if you watch this whole thing, I hope you enjoyed that. Enjoyed watching me go through that kind of transition. And this was not short, not as short as I would have liked, but that's okay. Have a wonderful evening, and hopefully I can do tomorrow's with a fresher mind.